Michael Carter thought he had it all, or at least that's what he believed. In his early 40s, he stood at the height of his career, running a wildly successful investment firm that had made him one of the wealthiest men in his elite circle. His mansion, nestled in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods just outside New York City, was a symbol of sheer luxury. From hand-carved marble floors to sparkling chandeliers and sprawling, perfectly landscaped gardens, every inch of his home oozed opulence. To outsiders, Michael was a definition of the American dream. By his side was his wife, Victoria, a stunning woman in her early 30s whose elegance never went unnoticed. Together, they looked like something out of a magazine. Victoria was always flawlessly dressed, her diamond jewelry gleaming as brightly as a picture-perfect smile. She regularly appeared on Michael's arm at high-profile charity galas, political fundraisers, and upscale corporate events. Their life was all champagne toast, designer wardrobes, and first-class trips to tropical islands. But beneath all that glamour, their marriage was little more than a polished illusion. Michael didn't see it. Not really. He loved Victoria the only way he knew how, through admiration and shared status. He truly believed that as long as he provided her with the finest things money could buy, their relationship would thrive. What he didn't realize was that Victoria's love came with strings attached. She adored the lavish lifestyle, the luxury cars, the penthouse vacations, but her affection was tied more to the life Michael provided than to the man himself. To her, he was a brand, not a partner. When Michael traveled for business, which he often did, Victoria didn't miss him. She filled her days with designer shopping sprees, beauty treatments at exclusive spas, and lunches with her equally glamorous friends. Michael, meanwhile, stayed consumed by work. He believed that his relentless pursuit of success was the glue holding everything together. In reality, the more he worked to maintain their image, the more their emotional connection faded. But Michael was too busy chasing deals and building wealth to notice how far apart they drifted. Someone else noticed, though. Her name was Emily. Emily had been the housekeeper at Michael's estate for several years. She was quiet, observant, and kept mostly to herself. While others on the household staff did their work with clinical detachment, Emily moved with thoughtfulness. She noticed things, the kind of things that no one else did, like the stress buried behind Michael's carefully practiced smile, or the fatigue in his eyes after endless meetings. Emily came from a modest background. She was young, hard-working, and kind-hearted, carrying a calm strength that set her apart. She had grown to admire Michael, not for his wealth or power, but for his persistence, for how he carried so much responsibility on his shoulders without asking for anything in return. Though Michael rarely looked her way, Emily respected him deeply. One afternoon, while she was dusting the shelves in his study, she overheard him on a call. His voice was sharp, tense and low. He spoke quickly, and though she couldn't hear everything, she heard enough to understand. Things were not going well. Serious financial trouble was brewing. When the call ended, Michael sat there, staring at nothing, his usual composure slipping. For a moment, he looked less like the confident mogul and more like a man on the edge. Emily quietly kept dusting, pretending not to notice. But inside, she felt a pang of concern. Unlike Victoria, who only saw the luxury Michael could offer, Emily had grown to care about the man himself. She noticed the skipped meals, the late-night pacing, the quiet sighs when he thought no one was listening. She saw what no one else saw. Emily never asked for thanks. But over time, she began to show small, quiet gestures of care. A fresh pot of coffee left near Michael's desk during late work nights. A warm plate of food placed just outside his study door when she sensed he hadn't eaten. She never said anything, never interrupted him or sought recognition. It was just her way of being kind. Michael, absorbed in the pressure of his business and the weight of keeping up appearances, hardly noticed at first. But somehow, those small acts became familiar, comforting, a quiet reminder that in the vast, echoing halls of his mansion, someone still cared, even if he wasn't fully aware of it. Emily's presence became a subtle yet steady part of his life, a calm in the storm he didn't know he needed. The difference between Victoria and Emily couldn't have been more stark. Victoria was the embodiment of indulgence, graceful, glamorous, and completely immersed in the world of designer labels and high society dinners. Her affection depended entirely on Michael's ability to maintain the lifestyle she adored. But Emily, she was different. She never asked for anything, never expected attention. Her concern wasn't rooted in money or what Michael could offer. It was quiet, sincere, and real. While others were drawn to his power, Emily was moved by the man behind it. Michael had built a life surrounded by status-hungry people, most of whom clung to him because of what he had, not who he was. And in all that noise, the one person who truly saw him, who genuinely cared, remained in the background, unnoticed, but always there. Even though Michael didn't yet recognize it, Emily's small, thoughtful gestures had started to fill a space in his heart, a space long buried beneath surface-level affection and shallow praise. And that fragile thread of kindness, it would soon become his anchor, because the world Michael had worked so hard to build was about to fall apart. It happened almost overnight. The empire he had spent his life crafting, carefully built on smart deals and bold risks, was suddenly crumbling. A major investment collapsed without warning, triggering a cascade of financial disasters that no one saw coming. Michael, once praised for his business acumen and bulletproof instincts, was blindsided. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized, his company teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. At first, Michael did what he always did, fight. He called in every favor, leveraged every last connection, burned through nights trying to stop the bleeding. But it was no use. The damage was done. Within weeks, the headlines hit. The media devoured his fall from grace. One-time allies whispered behind closed doors, distancing themselves as fast as they could. The man who once dominated boardrooms was now branded a failure. Desperate, and with nowhere else to turn, Michael turned to Victoria. He hoped, maybe even believed, he'd find comfort in her arms. Someone to lean on. But when he finally opened up, shared the full extent of the devastation, he saw something flicker in her eyes, something cold. First annoyance, then disgust, and finally, nothing at all. Victoria's expression hardened. The warmth was gone. The air between them turned sharp, silent, and bitter. That night, without drama or delay, she packed a suitcase. Her movements were swift, calculated, as if she had rehearsed this moment. "I didn't sign up for this," she said flatly, her voice stripped of emotion. "You promised me comfort, luxury. I didn't marry a man who couldn't provide that." Michael stood there in shock, her words hitting harder than any financial loss he'd suffered. It wasn't just his world crumbling, it was everything. "Victoria, please." Michael's voice cracked with desperation. "This is just a rough patch. I can rebuild everything. I need a little time." But Victoria didn't flinch. Her eyes were cold, unyielding. "Time is something I don't have, Michael," she said flatly, her tone edged with impatience. "I'm not going to stick around and watch you fall apart. I have my own life to live." And with that, she turned and walked out. The sharp click of her heels echoed across the marble floors, the same floors that once reflected their laughter, their lavish parties, their so-called perfect life. Now, all Michael could hear was a fading sound of her departure. He stood there, frozen, watching the woman he had once built his entire world around walk away. She didn't look back. Not once. She left him in the moment he needed her the most. The days that followed were a haze of heartbreak and disbelief. Michael wandered through the now hollow mansion like a ghost. The silence inside the house was almost unbearable. Every room, once overflowing with luxury, now felt cold and mocking. Every carefully selected piece of furniture reminded him of what he had tried to build and how meaningless it all turned out to be. He had poured his soul into that life, into her, and when it crumbled, so did her love. Yet in the wreckage of his world, one person remained, Emily. Unlike Victoria, Emily never left. She continued her work quietly, with the same calm focus she had always shown. She had seen it all, the collapse of the empire, the heartbreak that followed, and still she stayed. No judgment, no questions, just small, steady acts of kindness. A warm plate of food waiting when he hadn't eaten all day. A fresh cup of coffee every morning. Gentle reminders that he wasn't entirely alone. Michael, drowning in the shock of betrayal, barely noticed at first. But as the emptiness settled into something dull and aching, he began to feel those gestures. He began to see her. Every thoughtful act felt like a balm against the rawness of his loss. When everyone else had turned away, board members, so-called friends, even the woman he loved, Emily had stayed. And not because of money or obligation. She had simply chosen to. One evening, as Michael sat alone in his dim study, the weight of everything finally bore down on him. His elbows rested on the desk, his hands covering his face. The tears he had refused to shed for days finally broke through. And then, softly, a knock. He looked up. Emily stood in the doorway, a small tray in her hands. Soup, fresh bread, a quiet meal. She walked in and placed it gently in front of him. No words, just a soft, knowing gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was full, not empty, with something deeper than words. A quiet understanding. A presence that didn't ask or take, only gave. At last, Michael's voice broke the stillness. Rough, raw. Why are you still here, Emily? He asked. You know I can't pay you any more. I don't have anything left to give. Emily's eyes softened. She smiled gently, just a small curve of her lips, full of reassurance. I never stayed for the money, Mr. Carter, she said quietly. I stayed because I believe in loyalty, in being there for people when they need it most. Money doesn't define a person. Her words hit deeper than she could have known. Something in him cracked, the part that measured people by their usefulness, that lived by deals and power and polished surfaces. In front of him stood someone with none of that, no fortune, no status. And yet her heart was richer than anyone he had ever known. From that day forward, Michael began to lean on her, not out of need, but trust. He found solace in her quiet strength. Emily became his anchor, the one steady presence in a world that had flipped upside down. With her quiet strength at his side, Michael began to find his footing again. On the darkest days, when everything felt like it was slipping away, she reminded him, without saying a word, that he wasn't alone, that someone still saw value in him, not because of what he had, but because of who he was. One evening, they sat together in the kitchen over a simple dinner, grilled chicken and a side of vegetables. Nothing extravagant, no silver platters, just two people sharing a quiet meal at a plain wooden table. A world away from the lavish dining rooms and catered soirees Michael once knew. But somehow, it meant more. Michael looked across the table at Emily, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something warm settle inside him. It wasn't just comfort, it was peace. There was something profoundly grounding about her presence. Something he'd never experienced with Victoria or any of the polished people who once filled his life with shallow laughter and hollow praise. It was in those quiet moments, in the stripped-down stillness of his once grand home, that Michael began to understand what companionship really meant. Victoria's love had vanished the second the money ran dry. But Emily's loyalty? It hadn't wavered once. She didn't see him as a fallen millionaire. She saw him as a man, flawed, struggling, human, a man worthy of kindness. And that recognition, it cracked something open inside him. For the first time in his life, Michael felt something unfamiliar, real, unguarded gratitude. Emily had given him something no wealth could buy, a sense of worth that had nothing to do with titles or bank accounts. She showed him the power of loyalty, the strength of quiet kindness, and the rare beauty of someone who gave without expecting anything in return. And slowly, Michael began to heal, not with luxury or grand gestures, but through her steady, compassionate presence. As weeks turned into months, he found himself spending more time by her side, in the garden, in the kitchen, on long walks through the neighborhood where he once drove his sports car but now strolled with his hands in his pockets and a mind full of reflection. In the middle of all that loss, Emily became his closest friend, his truest companion. She knew when to speak and when to simply sit beside him. She didn't fill silences with empty chatter. She offered comfort in the kind of way that didn't need words. And for Michael, who had once measured relationships in power and influence, that quiet, honest bond was unlike anything he had ever known. Bit by bit, he began to see her more clearly. Her kindness, her patience, her strength, not loud or showy, but strong in the way a river is strong, always flowing, always steady. She never asked for praise, never sought his attention. Her loyalty didn't need validation. The more he noticed, the more he admired her. And then one evening, something shifted. They were sharing tea after dinner, an easy ritual they had grown into. Emily was telling a story about something that had happened earlier that day, something small, even silly. She laughed mid-sentence, the kind of soft, genuine laugh that comes when someone's completely at ease. Michael watched her, and for a moment, everything around them faded. Her laughter, her smile, the way she poured his tea like it was the most natural thing in the world. It stirred something in him. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was deeper, warmer, something he didn't want to name. He had never felt this with Victoria, or anyone else, for that matter. But as those feelings took root, so did the Fae. Michael struggled with it, battled himself over it. The idea of falling for someone he once saw only as a housekeeper made him uncomfortable. Not because of Emily, but because of himself. He was raised in a world that drew invisible lines between wealth and class, between the elite and everyone else. And despite everything he had lost, that part of him still lingered. He didn't know how to cross that line. He wasn't sure if he could. Emily, meanwhile, had no idea. She remained as she always had, kind, steady, unaware of the emotional storm quietly building inside the man she had never stopped caring for. Emily's presence had begun to stir something in Michael, something he couldn't name, but couldn't ignore either. She remained as steady and quiet as ever, caring for him without expectations, her feelings tucked neatly behind her gentle composure. Emily had long accepted a place in his life. For her, caring for Michael had never been about love, recognition, or hoping for anything in return. It was simply about easing his burdens, about being there when no one else had stayed. She saw him hurting and did what she could. Quiet meals, warm tea, silence when silence was needed. She expected nothing beyond friendship, and in her heart, that had always been enough. Then, one evening, something happened, something small, almost accidental, that would forever shift how Michael saw her. Emily was tidying up his study, as she had done countless times before, when she found a small, dusty photo frame tucked away in the back of a drawer. Without thinking, she placed it on the desk, not expecting Michael to even notice. But he did. The moment he stepped into the room, his gaze fell on the frame, and he stopped cold. It was an old photograph, one Michael hadn't seen in years. In it, a much younger version of himself stood in front of a modest single-story home with his parents. His father had an arm wrapped around his mother's shoulder. Michael, maybe 9 or 10, was grinning, his smile wide and untroubled. He picked up the photo, his expression softening into something almost sorrowful. "That was taken right before my dad's business went under," he said quietly, more to himself than to Emily. "We lost everything not long after that. I was just a kid, but I still remember how quickly life changed." Emily stepped closer, drawn to the image. She looked more closely, her brows furrowing in thought. Something about the house, the street, it sparked something in her memory. And then it hit her. A quiet gasp escaped her lips. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and filled with astonishment. "Mr. Carter, I know that house." Michael turned to her, confused. She continued, slowly, the realization still settling in her chest. "My family, we lived in that neighborhood. I remember your house. I remember your family struggling. And I remember my mother. Every week, she'd send food to your doorstep, quietly, without ever saying a word." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. She never wanted anyone to know. She just said it was the right thing to do. Michael stared at her, stunned. He had never known. His parents had always been proud, too proud to talk about the help they received during those hard years. And now, standing before him, was a daughter of the woman who had quietly helped keep his family afloat. The one who had shown them kindness when they had nothing. He felt a rush of disbelief. Gratitude. Oh! For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy, but not with tension, rather with something deeper, something that felt like history folding back on itself. Emily's family had helped him long before he'd ever known her. Long before success, before wealth, before the mansion and the business and the fall. It was as if life had come full circle, her mother offering him quiet kindness in his youth, and now Emily, unknowingly continuing the legacy. Michael's voice broke the silence, thick with emotion. "Emily, I had no idea, he said softly. I never knew your family helped us. I never knew what we owed you. He paused. Thank you. Doesn't even come close. But Emily only shook her head, offering him a gentle smile. You don't owe us anything, Mr. Carter, she said. My mother didn't help you because she expected anything. She just believed in doing what was right. She taught me that true kindness, it doesn't ask for anything in return. She looked down for a moment, her voice quieting. Maybe that's why I stayed. It just felt right. And in that moment, something inside Michael shifted. The last of his reservations, the invisible walls built by pride and status, crumbled. Emily wasn't just his housekeeper. She wasn't just a quiet companion in hard times. She was connected to him in a way deeper than anything he had known, bound to him by fate, by kindness, by something bigger than either of them could explain. And he realized then that what he felt for her wasn't just admiration. It was love, not the fleeting kind that came and went with money or status, but something rooted in respect, in gratitude, in shared history and silent loyalty. It was love, real and true, and finally, unmistakable. The superficial boundaries Michael had once built around himself, barriers of wealth, status, pride, had quietly dissolved. And now, with nothing left to hide behind, he finally saw things as they were. But in all the clarity he'd gained, there was one truth he hadn't yet spoken. He had never told Emily how deeply she had changed him, how her quiet strength, her simple presence, had transformed his world. She had no idea of the gratitude that pulsed through him, no idea that his affection had grown into something deeper, something real. And so, silently, Michael made himself a promise. He would tell her, he would show her what she meant to him, not through grand gestures, not through wealth, but through honesty, through love, the kind he'd never known before. In the days that followed, his feelings only deepened. The way she moved through the house, the way she smiled when she thought no one was looking, the way she made even silence feel like company. It all wove together into a quiet, undeniable truth. He loved her. But just as he began to gather the courage to speak those words aloud, something shifted. Emily began to pull away. She was still kind, still gentle, but there was a distance now. She avoided long moments alone with him. Her laughter came less easily, and her eyes, once open and unguarded, now held something else behind them. Hesitation, uncertainty. Michael noticed it immediately. And then, one evening, without warning, she spoke the words he never expected to hear. I think it's time for me to go, she said softly, standing in the entryway with her coat folded neatly over one arm. Her voice was low, sad, but firm. You don't need me here anymore, Mr. Carter. You've come so far. I'm glad I could help, but it's time. Michael stood in stunned silence. She was leaving. The very person who had carried him through the wreckage of his life. The woman who had shown him loyalty when the world turned away. The only soul who had seen him stripped of power and still stayed. And now she was walking away. As she turned toward the door, Michael reached for her hand. His fingers closed gently around Hayes, and when she looked back at him, he spoke, not with pride or performance, but with raw, open truth. Emily, please, don't go, he whispered. I may have lost everything, but I can't lose you. You're the one person who's truly been there. And I love you. Her eyes widened. Shock flashed across her face, and something else, too. Hope. The kind she had buried deep down long ago. The words hung between them like a fragile miracle, trembling but true. For a moment, the world went still. Everything that had once seemed so complicated, status, roles, expectations, fell away. All that remained was a connection they had built, slowly and quietly, through pain and care and resilience. In that instant, Michael saw it clearly. Emily wasn't just someone who had been there during his fall. She was the only person who had seen the real him, and loved him anyway. Not for his name, not for his money, but for who he was underneath it all. It was love, real, honest, and he was ready, finally ready, to give her his whole heart. But the next morning, she was gone. Michael searched the house, calling her name, room to room. Nothing. Her things were missing. Her room was neat, every item carefully arranged as if she hadn't wanted to cause a ripple on her way out. She had vanished, quietly, without goodbye. Then, in the kitchen, he saw it, a small note resting under a coffee cup. He picked it up, hands trembling. It was her handwriting. Clean, simple, delicate. Michael, you no longer need me here. I'm grateful for every moment we shared. But I believe my place was only to help you through the storm, not to become a weight in your future. I wish you happiness and peace. With love, Emily. The words hit like a wave, sharp and cold. She hadn't left because she wanted to. She had left because she thought he would be better off without her. She believed that staying might hold him back, that their love, unspoken, undefined, was something she wasn't allowed to keep. But she was wrong. His life, stripped of its wealth and titles, meant nothing without her. And now that he finally understood the truth, that he had spent his entire life searching for a love he never thought he'd deserve, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He had to find her. With a fire in his chest and a determination deeper than anything he'd ever felt, Michael set out, not to rebuild a company or reclaim his fortune, but to reclaim her. Michael set out to find her. He had no idea where she might have gone, but he didn't care how long it would take. He knew Emily, knew her heart. She wasn't the kind of person to stay in the spotlight. She would have disappeared somewhere quiet, far from the noise and chaos of the city, somewhere where the world wouldn't come knocking. But that didn't stop him. For days, Michael followed every faint lead. He retraced old steps, visited places they'd once spoken about in passing. Quiet towns, coastal routes, small roadside diners where people still knew each other by name. He reached out to the few people she had ever mentioned, though most didn't know much. Some hadn't seen her in years. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and luxury retreats now slept in motels and ate at gas station counters, chasing a quiet, steady presence that had become his entire world. Gone was a powerful, prideful businessman. In his place was a man driven only by the hope of finding someone who had loved him when there was nothing left to love. People he spoke to looked at him strangely. Why would someone like him be searching so desperately for someone like her? But Michael didn't care how it looked. Emily wasn't just someone to him. She was a reason he kept breathing. And then, just as his hope began to wear thin, on a quiet, rain-drenched afternoon in a sleepy little seaside village, it happened. He was walking through a crowded outdoor market, wet from the downpour, heart-heavy with exhaustion, when he saw her. She was just ahead, umbrella tucked under her arm, carrying a paper bag filled with fruit and vegetables, her coat damp from the weather. His heart stopped. "Emily," he called out, voice cracking with emotion. She froze. Slowly, she turned. Their eyes met, haze wide with disbelief. For a second, she looked like she might turn and vanish into the crowd. But Michael was already moving. Fast, desperate, determined. Within seconds, he was in front of her, breathless. "Please," he said, rain streaming down his face, his voice trembling. "Don't go. I've been searching for you every day since you left. I can't. I won't live my life without you." Emily looked down, her fingers tightening around the paper bag in her hands. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Michael," she whispered, "I left because I didn't want to weigh you down. You deserve a stable life, something secure. I didn't want to be the reason you couldn't move forward." He stepped closer, gently taking her hand in his. "No," he said firmly. "You're not a burden. You're everything. You showed me what love really means, what loyalty, kindness, patience look like. You stood by me when I had nothing, when everyone else disappeared." His voice cracked. "You are the love of my life, Emily, and I don't want a future that doesn't have you in it." She stared at him, tears in her eyes, her expression softening. For so long, she had believed she didn't belong in his world, that she was just a chapter in his story, not the ending. But now, hearing him say these words, with no mansion behind him, no business empire, no fortune, only truth, it shattered every wall she had built around her heart. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the sound of the rain. "Are you really choosing this? A life that isn't wrapped in wealth or power?" Michael smiled, his hand still in hers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said. "I don't care about money. I don't care about what people think. I care about you. I want a life built on love, not image. I want a partner who sees me for who I am and loves me anyway. And that's you, Emily. In the middle of that crowded, rain-slick market, surrounded by strangers and the soft hum of rainfall, Michael pulled her close. And Emily didn't pull away. Their embrace wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, powerful, like two souls finally finding their way back to each other. It was peace. It was home. In that moment, no words were needed. They both knew. This was a love they had been searching for all their lives, a love that had been quietly waiting, patiently growing, standing steady through every storm. And now, it was theirs. Together, they returned to a life far simpler than the one Michael had once known, but infinitely richer in all the ways that mattered. Gone were the days of boardrooms and ballroom galas. In their place were quiet mornings, shared laughter, and a home built not on marble and gold, but on mutual respect, shared strength, and unwavering love. As the weeks passed, their bond only deepened. It wasn't long before they decided to take the next step in their journey. Their wedding was nothing like the opulent affairs Michael had once attended with Eleanor and his elite circle. Instead, he and Emily chose something far more meaningful, a modest, heartfelt ceremony in a small countryside chapel. Only a few close friends gathered, many of them from the community Emily had touched through her humble outreach. Michael wore a simple, well-fitted suit. Emily, graceful as ever, walked down the aisle in a dress that reflected her essence, elegant, unpretentious, quietly beautiful. There were no photographers or diamond-studded guests, no press, no spectacle, just genuine smiles, sincere vows, and a sacred promise spoken between two souls who had walked through fire to find each other. For the first time in his life, Michael experienced a wedding that wasn't about image. It was about truth. In the months that followed, with Emily by his side, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He began to rebuild, not to reclaim a name or chase headlines, but to create a meaningful life, a life worthy of the love he had been given. With Emily's encouragement and wisdom, he launched a new company, not built on ambition alone, but on values, honesty, fairness, dignity. Slowly, success followed. But this time, Michael was a different man. He didn't measure his worth by bank statements or luxury cars. He used his growing wealth to support programs that trained and empowered those in need, initiatives Emily had quietly inspired. Every success became a way to give back. Every milestone, a reminder of where he had once been, and who had helped him rise again. Together, they lived a life many would call simple, but for them, it was perfect. Morning walks, shared meals, long talks by the fireplace, silent moments when nothing needed to be said, because everything was understood. Gone was the man who believed love could be bought. In his place stood someone humbled, someone grateful, someone who had finally learned what real wealth was. Their love story began as an unlikely connection, but it became something more, a transformation, a redemption, a reminder. In time, their story spread quietly through people they helped and the lives they touched. Folks spoke of Michael, the once proud millionaire who had lost everything, and, in doing so, found something greater. And of Emily, the quiet soul whose love had rebuilt a man from the inside out. Their story became a living lesson. That true love doesn't sparkle like diamonds, it endures like stone. That the most valuable things in life aren't bought or sold, they are earned. Through kindness, through loyalty, through showing up when no one else will. Years passed, seasons changed, and Michael and Emily continued their life side by side. No mansions, no headlines, just the steady joy of a life lived with intention, gratitude, and grace. They celebrated anniversaries not with fanfare, but with home-cooked meals and candlelight, surrounded by friends, laughter, and a quiet that felt like peace. And in the end, Michael often looked back, not with regret, but with wonder. He had once dreamed of a life full of riches, but in the arms of a woman who had once worked silently in the corners of his house, he found something better, a life full of meaning, a heart full of love, a soul finally at rest. Moral of the story: sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what truly matters. True wealth isn't found in power or possessions. It lives in loyalty, in compassion, and in the quiet love of someone who stands by you when the world walks away. And in the end, The richest life is the one built on love that asks for nothing, but gives everything.